thanks for being there with us. I thought it was a lovely, lovely evening to be together.
It was a fun night.
Sorry, Merle. Hey, Merle.
Hey, it was a fun night.
It was fun, right? It was lovely. I'm glad we had so many folks on, and just kind of a nice way to be together as we welcome Hanukkah. I think, which is germane to full disclosure, we're not going to talk about the Parshat today. We're going to talk about Hanukkah. And it's funny. I was on a call earlier this week with someone who said to me, Rabbi, Hanukkah's not usually my thing so much, but I'm really leaning into it this year. And I think hey Paige, hey Mike, good to see you guys. And I think I feel in some ways the same. Definitely I think many of us who have kids can know, Hanukkah you get into with your kids and stuff. But again, germane to our conversation today, I think Hanukkah sometimes feels like not an afterthought, but a minor holiday of minor significance, which actually it is. More on that a little bit later. But I think, Hanukkah being this holiday about light and bringing light into the darkness and into a dark world, something that we can all use this year, particularly. And we'll kind of come back to that theme a little bit on the other side. So we'll get right to it. Most of you have heard me say I hate lectures. I'm a rabbi. I'm not a lecturer. And so by all means, I don't think there's a such thing as an interruption or an off-topic question. So as we're going, if I say something that sparks anything, idea, thought, comment, question, offense, drop it in the chat, throw up a blue hand, throw up a real hand, and we'll go there, I promise. We're all adults. You can also unmute yourself. People not go nuts. I just saw a question. Ooh, great question, Sukasa. Much of a celebration in Israel? No. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Generally speaking, it's funny. David Eshel and I were talking last night. Rabbi Eshel and I were talking on the Zoom, and his wife Stephanie popped on two versions of the same situation. One was David said to me 2 days ago that they had no Hanukkah candles in the house because ordinarily they are in Israel this time of year. His family, leading one of our trips. So they haven't needed to have Hanukkah candles at home. And then last night, Stephanie was saying, with their kids and gifts, and that again, they're usually in Israel, so it's less of an issue. Because in Israel, Hanukkah is not this Hanukkah gets set up for completely understandable reasons, at least in the US, as a Jewish corollary to Christmas, right? And in Israel, Hanukkah is a celebration. There's lighting of Hanukkah, publicly, every evening, and you can stand on, Emek Orfaim or on Ben Yehuda Street or Jaffa Street, Jaffa Road, and there'll be a Hanukkah lighting, and people will randomly, Risik and smiling, people randomly pass out sufgan, jelly donuts, whatever. And then you go back on about your business and go to dinner and whatever. Like it's not this, kind of huge thing the way. The way that it has sort of become here. So it's definitely a more minor thing. And we're going to get to the reasons why it's a more minor thing, I think, in a few minutes. Thank you, Sukasa, for setting us up with that. So we're going to get right to it here. So what is Hanukkah, right? What is this whole Vakakta holiday of Hanukkah that, if you ask a quick, I guess, story, because, you're all captive on Zoom and Rabbi's privilege, you'll indulge me. Anyone who's ever flown El Al knows that one of the lovely experiences you have is that the staff person prior to boarding does a little like security interview with you and asks you all sorts of random questions, some of which have to do with Judaism potentially. So it's like, noon-ish. I'm standing in the Tom Bradley terminal at LAX, about to board an El Al flight, nonstop flight to Ben Gurion to Tel Aviv, to move to Israel for a year for my first year of rabbinical school. And I didn't sleep well the night before. I was anxious at an airport hotel and all these things. And so I'm like half asleep, wearing sunglasses and, sweatpants or whatever, and wearing a winter coat, even though it's June, because you didn't want to pack it. It takes up too much space. So the El Al guy's interviewing me and he's like, so you're Jewish? And yeah, telling him why I'm going there. And he's very confused about, rabbinical school because I don't look like what a rabbi should look like. And he says, so what was the last Jewish holiday you celebrated? Sorry, I'm confusing two trips. This was actually in January. He said, what was the last Jewish holiday you celebrated? I'm thinking in my head, okay, it's January. I remember Rosh Hashanah. I remember Yom Kippur, Simchat Torah, something after. I can't think of it. So I pull a fast one. I'm like, Shabbat. And he looks at me like, nice try. Right? I'm thinking, like, what? It's January. Like, what? And he finally looks at me. He's like, Hanukkah? Right? Like the holiday that even the non-Jews like know about Judaism, right? Which is a way to underscore Hanukkah in I think the broader world is sort of elevated, maybe next to Passover, as like the one Jewish holiday that everybody knows about. Which is ironic because it's such a minor holiday and one that I think many of us don't really understand the basis for. So what is Hanukkah, right? Oil, miraculous, right? The Maccabees come, they rededicate the temple, they find this little teeny tiny vial of oil and it's only going to last for one day and they light it and oh, it's miraculous like Santa Claus, the oil lasts for 8 days. I hate to break it to anybody here, that probably never happened. That myth about the oil is probably just about as real as Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, right? Okay. So what is Hanukkah really? Any student of history, most of us know, right? Under Hasmonean, under Greek control, who in essence outlawed the practice of Judaism, you have a family of Judah Maccabee and his family who in essence are religious zealots and who launch a underground guerrilla war against this occupying force. They're a minority and they go town to town, and to put it plainly, it's a cruel, brutal, and bloody slaughter of anyone who stands in their way until finally they reach Jerusalem and retake the temple and ultimately rededicate it. Hanukkah means to rededicate. The word means to rededicate the temple. And many of us have probably heard that the reason Hanukkah is actually 8 days has nothing to do with the oil lasting for 8 days, has to do with the fact that it was most likely a late observance of Sukkot. That they couldn't do Sukkot in the temple, at the prescribed time a month or two before, right? And when they retook the temple, they observed a fashion of Sukkot, and that's why Hanukkah actually lasts for 8 days. Other evidence to support that, from a liturgical standpoint, there are prayers, namely Hallel, a collection of psalms that are recited on Sukkot, Shavuah, and Passover, that are bizarrely recited on Hanukkah, although there's no theoretical reason to recite them on Hanukkah, also supports the idea that this was initially kind of a second Sukkot, because otherwise, why else would you be reciting Hallel? Now that begs the question, don't tell my 4.5-year-old daughter, Evelyn, actually she knows, but that begs the question, so where did this like lovely, and I use this word deliberately, myth of the oil that lasted for 8 days come from? Right? Why does everybody grow up thinking, oh, well, Hanukkah, Jews and non-Jews, Hanukkah is because they found this oil and lasted for 8 days. And that's the miracle of Hanukkah, is that the oil lasted. No. The miracle of Hanukkah, from my perspective, is that this little group of Maccabees who had the odds stacked against them were able to survive, and not just survive, but thrive, overthrow their Greek occupiers, and that Judaism was ultimately able to survive. The miracle of Hanukkah is the miracle of Jewish survival. The miracle of Hanukkah is the miracle of Jewish survival, not, some oil. That's a story for kids, which is fun, but we're not kids. Right? So where does this story about the oil come from? We're going to get to that in just a minute when we get into our text. So here's a question. In which book of the Torah do we find the story of Hanukkah?
Maccabees.
Okay. So
in the Ketuvim, in the Chronicles.
Okay, great question. So Miriam, I'm going to go with you first because you make my case better for me than Susan did. But Susan, thank you. So Miriam says it comes in Ketuvim. So that's not Torah, that's Bible. So the first thing I'm going to say is, right, so it's not in the Torah, right? Not in Torah anywhere. No, it's not in Ketuvim. Susan, you're right that it's in the book of Maccabees. However,
here's the Apocrypha.
It's in the Talmud.
Here's a fun fact that people don't think about. And
My Hanukkah.
Right, my Hanukkah. We're going to get to that text from the Talmud in just a minute, Miriam. Here's an interesting thing that people don't think about unless you think about it or unless you know enough to think about. Hanukkah is not mentioned anywhere in the Torah. It's mentioned in the book of Maccabees, but the book of Maccabees is not a part of the Hebrew Bible. Back to that in a second. So the story of Hanukkah, here, I'll reach behind you, appears nowhere in the Hebrew Bible to underscore the idea of Hanukkah as a minor thing. I would say it's minor, and then it is further minimized by the rabbis. It was a choice to not put the book of Maccabees in the Hebrew Bible. And we can talk about why in a minute, but that was a choice. So you cannot open a Hebrew Bible and find the real story of Hanukkah. Just let that marinate for a second, right? Right? So I would argue that the reason the story is minimized, the reason the story is excluded from mainstream, Jewish scripture, and I would even say rabbinic literature. Yes, Miriam, it gets mentioned in the Talmud, which we're going to look at in a minute, but the story mentioned in the Talmud is a different story. Has to do with a deep, deep discomfort that the rabbis have with the story, with this idea of Jews killing Jews, of Jews as aggressive, offensive, militaristic warriors. That, I think, is a very uncomfortable narrative for the rabbis. I think that the rabbis, and I would even go so far as to say, through many periods in Jewish history, including today, there are those in the Jewish world who are far more comfortable with the narrative of Jews as victim or as passive rather than active, right? Particularly if we look through a historical lens of, the rabbis not wanting to highlight this story of Jews in essence, instigating a coup or an uprising when they were still living under other occupying powers, right? So it's not so good for, your own self-preservation to be elevating this story of, hey, we overthrow those who occupy us and tell us we can't do what we want when you're living under Roman rule, right? That's not a great message. So it's understandable, right? But I think it comes from this deep-seated discomfort with this idea of the real story, which is this kind of aggressive, offensive, militaristic conquest, really. And so they push it to the side. They literally write it out of the book. And that's, I think, the basis for why it's such an insignificant holiday for the most part, right? And even in its observance today, you think about it, it's one of the few holidays. None of the, this came up in an article I was reading today, actually. It's at LA Times today, back page of the front section today, about how in the Orthodox world, Hanukkah in COVID times in Zoom poses no problems because there's no prohibitions against using technology and electricity on Hanukkah the way there is on most other holidays. So the Zoom Hanukkah thing, candlelight, totally fine. So what happens? So how do we get to this whole business about the oil, right? So the story of the actual Fair Hanukkah happens in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Okay, so 2,200 years ago, something like that, right? Fast forward 700-800 years to the 7th, 8th century, early 9th century of the Common Era, and you have the rabbis in Babylonia, putting together the Talmud. And they once again take up this question of Hanukkah. Now, again, it's a minor and insignificant holiday. So why are they taking up this question of Hanukkah? So for those who are not Talmud scholars, this is sort of a beautiful insight into sort of the way the Talmud works, operates, is organized. The rabbis in the Talmud are having a conversation in Tractate Shabbat, right? Having a conversation about the kinds of oil and the kinds of wicks that can be used to light Shabbat, what we now think of as candles, but were then just lamps. Okay, whole conversation like, is this kind of oil okay? Is that kind of oil okay? From an olive, from a this, from a that, from a, right? And the wick, and does the wick absorb the oil? And if it does it go out? And if it goes out, are you allowed to relight it? And all these things that Moshe gossip about Shabbat lights. And if it goes out, are you allowed to relight it? Right? And so, as so often happens, because this is the way the minds of the rabbis work, the Talmudic minds of the rabbis, that then goes to, okay, one of the sages asks, well, okay, so it's not permitted for Shabbat candles to use this kind of wick or this kind of oil, but can you use these kinds of wicks or oils when it comes to Hanukkah candles? And then all of a sudden, now we're talking about Hanukkah, right? That's how they get there. So we're gonna do a little Talmud today, even though it's Torah study. I'm gonna pull up this sort of chain of cognition. We're kind of gonna go through it together. We'll highlight and talk about some of, I think, the interesting questions and explanations that come up, some of which may be known to some of us, some of which are a little more obscure, about both the ways in which Hanukkah is observed and some of the prescriptions that the rabbis make, as well as, again, the creation of this narrative about the oil. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen. Be all super fancy here. Okay, here we go. All right, so, okay, so this is for the Talmud sages out there. This is Tractate Shabbat, the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Shabbat, page 21a, and there's a little bit of 21b or 22b, a little bit of 22a in here too. So I'm going to read the first one, and we'll talk about it, and then maybe some folks will be generous enough to read a little bit of the text with me. So the beginning says, again, with this idea that the sages taught in a braita, which is a sentence or so, that the basic commandment of Hanukkah is to each day have a light kindled by a person or the head of the household for himself and his household, right? So dad, whoever, right, in a patriarchal society, supposed to light a light, singular, one candle. That fulfills the mitzvah of Hanukkah. Light one candle each day for Hanukkah. That's it. Now, they go on to say that the Mehadrin, the more observant, the more meticulous in their performance of the commandments, each person in the household lights a light, right? So I light my candle each night. Claudia lights her candle each night. Eddie lights his candle each night. Merle lights her candle each night, right? By the way, I'm not picking up, I'm just the people who I happen to see at the moment on my screen. Hey, Eddie, right? So everybody lights their own candle each night. Great, lovely, right? Some houses probably you have each person lights their own Hanukkah. I've seen that, right? Okay. And then they go on to say, and the super religious, the people who are even more meticulous, they adjust the number of lights daily, right? So we light some corresponding number of candles each day to the night on which we're celebrating, second night, third night, fifth night, eighth night, what have you. And then here comes this sort of famous machlochet, famous debate that many of us have probably encountered before, which is, and I just was talking about this with first grade, which is dismiss for a moment what we all know that we do in terms of observing Hanukkah. If you think about it, it would very likely make sense to celebrate 8 days of Hanukkah by beginning by lighting 8 candles and having it be like a countdown, right? 8 candles the first night, 7 candles the second night, 6 candles, so on and so forth, 1 candle the last night, and then you're done because there's no more candles to light. That would actually logically make, in some ways, the most sense. And that's the opinion of the house of Shammai, the school of Shammai. Hillel disagrees and says, no. You should light one candle on the first day and add a candle each night, right? And there's this whole disagreement, which is articulated here in the text, right? Whether whether the number of candles you light corresponds here to the incoming days or the days that have passed. Is it about the future or about the past? Right? And all sorts of different reasons, right? Shammai's opinion, again, is that it corresponds to Sukkot. But the ultimate answer to this is this idea right here that in matters of sanctity, in matters of holiness, you don't descend, you ascend, right? We don't want to diminish. We want to bring more light, more holiness into the world, right? Right. We don't want to diminish light. We want to bring, and Hanukkah, as many of us think of it, the festival of light, about bringing more light into the world, not extinguishing a little bit of that light every day. So that's how we get to this place where we light an additional candle every single night in our observance of Hanukkah when we light our Chanukiot. Quick side note, pet peeve of mine. It's actually not called a menorah. It's a Chanukiah. Menorah just means candelabra, basically. And the original menorah was a candelabra that stood on the altar at the temple in Jerusalem. If everybody wants to close their eyes for 1 second, imagine you're sitting in the sanctuary at the Glazer campus. You look, there's two big, tall, 8-foot golden menorot, is the plural, on the bima. They have 6 branches, plus the shamash, not 7, not 8, right? That is a menorah. On Hanukkah, we light a special menorah with 8 branches called a Hanukkah menorah or a Chanukiah. So all Chanukiot, plural, are menorot, plural, but all menorot are not Chanukiot, if that makes sense, right? All menorahs are Hanukkah menorahs, but all Hanukkah menorahs are not menorahs. Just a little side note there. You can be the smartest person at the Hanukkah table. All right. So that's how we get to a place where we light, an additional candle each night in our Chanukiah to celebrate Hanukkah. So for those who watched the video that I think went out today, or excuse me, yesterday, that I did about Hanukkah, you're going to get this is a little bit of a re-articulation of this. But where are we supposed to place the Chanukiah? This is the next issue that the rabbis take up in this beautiful piece of Talmud. So I'll just be the first to say, I grew up, we put the Chanukiah on the kitchen counter on the table. That was it, right? A lot of us probably are familiar with the idea of, right? Eddie's shaking his hand there, right? That you're meant to place the Chanukiah on the window. Right. Many people, right? So that is in the window. Sukkos is also thumbs up. So in the window is actually the second best option, but it's what happens virtually everywhere where people know anything outside of Israel. So we'll go with the text and I'll talk about it. So the rabbis say that you're supposed to place the Chanukiah at the entrance of your house, on the outside your house, outside the front door, so that everybody can see it. Outside. Now, forget California wildfire issues, but outside. And that if you live, on the 35th floor of an apartment building on the Upper West Side, then you can put it in the window. That's totally fine. But it should be adjacent, and this is a category of space, the public domain, right? It should be in a place where people can still see it, not an interior window into a courtyard, but out where people can see it. Not the window into the backyard, right? But into the front yard. So people driving down the street theoretically can see your Chanukiah. But then in a time of danger, it's okay to put it on a table, in the living room or in the dining room, and no one has to see it if there's safety concerns. This still plays out today. Anybody that's been, Reese is going to smile even though she's not on my screen. Anybody who's been in Israel during Hanukkah, right? It is legit. It is in the front yard. Many homes in Israel have like a cubby hole looking thing on the wall of the front of the house by the front door that is there so that you can place your Chanukiah on it during Hanukkah and light it with a little glass thing over it, right? That's where it goes. 2 reasons that that's the case. Same for the window. One, back to this idea, same with the candles, more light out into the world at this darkest time of year. We forget about that, right? The winter solstice is in like 10 days. So it's just after Hanukkah this year. Sometimes falls during Hanukkah, but always right around Hanukkah, which is the day in which there are the most hours of darkness. Quite literally the darkest time of the year. It is not an accident that Hanukkah falls around the darkest time of the year. And that what we do during this darkest time of the year is to put more light, bring more light out into the world. The other is this idea of publicizing the miracle of Hanukkah. Publicizing the miracle, showing this miracle of not the oil lasting, in my opinion, but of Jewish survival out into the world. So the next piece of this, which comes from the next page of Talmud actually, but I shoehorned it in here, is that you put it outside your front door, and you're actually ideally meant to place it, I think this is just poetic, opposite the mezuzah. So that the mezuzah is on one side of the door, and the Chanukiah is on the other side of the door. And the idea being that when you walk into the house, that you are surrounded by mitzvot, by the commandments as you enter the home, right? The mezuzah is on one side, the Chanukiah is on the other side. Okay, so that's where it goes ideally, right? Again, outside of the land of Israel, virtually no one places their Hanukkah, outside the house. I will, and we don't think a lot about this, given where most of us live. But if you walk through a densely populated, observant Jewish neighborhood, even in LA, walk through Pico Robertson, walk through the western side of Hancock Park or in Beverlywood, you'll see Hanukkah in all the windows. And this may sound odd, it is kind of like the Jewish version of Christmas lights. It really is this sort of like the symbolism and exemplification of this miracle, and this beautiful light kind of coming through and out into the world, and you can stroll around. The rabbis actually mandate the time that you're meant to light the Hanukkah, and it is meant to be, with the exception of tonight on Shabbat, in which, just in case anybody wonders, you light your Hanukkah first and then your Shabbat candles. So tonight you have to light the Hanukkah just before darkness, but ordinarily you're mandated to light the Hanukkah just after it gets dark outside. And the reason the rabbis decide this is because that was the time of day when the majority of people were coming home from the marketplace, coming home from work, and theoretically the streets would be busy. And so it was the time of day. Think about like primetime TV. Same thing. The time of day in which the largest number of people would see your Hanukkah lit is this kind of after work, just got dark, people are all walking home hour. And again, that's about, one, as many people as possible seeing the Hanukkah being lit, seeing this public display of this miracle. And that's why they're lit at that particular time, just after darkness usually. So more about this light of the Hanukkah. This is one of my favorite things about the Hanukkah, actually, which I'm going to contrast with Shabbat candles on the other side of the text. So Rava says that one must kindle another light in addition to the Hanukkah in order to use that light, because it's prohibited to use the light of the Hanukkah. Okay, so if there's a bonfire, right, you don't need to light another light because you have the light of the bonfire. Okay, so the idea is that you're prohibited from using the light of the Hanukkah for anything. You can't, take your menorah and carry it down the hall with you because you need to see how to get to the bedroom. Or you can't sit with the Hanukkah on the end table and read a book with the light of the Hanukkah, right? You are simply meant to enjoy it. Simply meant to enjoy it. It's the opposite of the Shabbat candles, as I just said. Shabbat candles exist basically just for a purely utilitarian purpose, which is so you don't have to have dinner in the dark. That's the reason we light Shabbat candles for the most part, is so we don't have to have dinner in the dark. That's why they're mandated to burn for at least 3 hours. It's about having light That's why you light them right before Shabbat begins, so that you have some light. The Hanukkah candles are the opposite. You just meant to enjoy them. And I'll say, and I'll make this plea, it's only the second night of Hanukkah, so you've got like 7 more days, 7 more nights to do this. One of my favorite things to do, I don't do it every night, one of my favorite things to do is to, particularly once you get into the second half of Hanukkah and you've got, 4 or 5 candles going, is just to sit in the dark and watch the candles burn. It takes 25, 30 minutes, whatever, just to watch them burn in the quiet, in silence. At least for me, has always been a very beautiful and kind of quiet, meditative thing. Just to, take a break for a few minutes and just enjoy it, enjoy the light. There's that, I think as kids, I watch my daughter, that sort of magic that you see when you watch a flame on a candle sort of flickering and you actually see it and look at it. That's what we're meant to do with the Hanukkah lights, is just enjoy them, not to use them for anything. Okay. How we doing? Everybody okay? All right. Okay, now we get to the good part. It's all good. But now we get to this. Okay, so what is this whole Hanukkah thing, right?
Wait a minute, Beau.
Yeah.
You didn't see that there's a couple of things in the chat.
Oh, I didn't, because I'm on share screen. Thank you, Risa, for drawing me. Okay, let me look here.
Pleasure, since I wrote one of them.
Oh, no, you can absolutely use Shabbat candles.
I thought, for example, if your match goes out,
thank you for the distinction. Yes, you cannot use them to light another fire, with the exception of a Havdalah candle, I think. But no, you're right. You cannot use them to kindle another. You can't because it's not even that you can't use Shabbat candles. There's a prohibition on Shabbat against transferring fire.
Okay.
Right, but you're allowed to use the light of the Shabbat candles to do things. You're right. You can't take the Shabbat candle and light your furnace or whatever with it, right? Or start a bonfire with it. But you can take the Shabbat candles and use it to read a book or to see your way down the hallway.
Okay.
You can use the utility of the light of the candle. Whereas the Hanukkah candles, the prohibition is against using their light. Theoretically, there's no problem with using them to light anything else because all the prohibitions on Shabbat don't exist for Hanukkah. Right, so it's about the use of the light. Thank you for that distinction. Why don't we light candles every night? Good question too, guys. Theoretically, you would, right? In a world with no electricity, you absolutely would light candles all the time because you need them to see. The reason it's prescribed on Shabbat to do them before Shabbat begins is because you are prohibited from doing it after Shabbat begins. Right? On a Tuesday, if you decide you wake up in the middle of the night and you got to, make your way to the bathroom or whatever, you light a candle that's on your nightstand and you take it with you to those little, holder things to the bathroom with you. There's no need to prescribe it because there's no prohibition against it. Great question.
One other question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
What about in our modern age where we have electrified Hanukkah with bulbs and electric current instead of an actual flame?
Yeah.
Do we say anything about that as far as halacha?
No, I mean, it gets treated theoretically gets treated the same way that, electricity gets treated the same way as fire. Right. So the same idea that theoretically you wouldn't, in a dark room, use that light of that Hanukkah to read a book or what have you, even though it's, plug-in kind of thing.
Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah, and then Claudia, I see your hand up. Yeah, go, Merle.
I thought that once you've lighted whatever, the Shabbat candles, you don't do anything. I mean, it's like, that's it. You're in Shabbat and you don't. That's why I always thought you don't use them for anything.
Well, you don't do anything. I mean, such as what?
Well, I mean, I'm going by our Orthodox family.
Yeah.
That they cook everything before. They get everything ready.
Right, you can't cook. But the cooking has to do with hot food, and that again is about fire.
Okay. But then even at camp, Shabbat is after services, lunch, and whatever that Shabbat program is. It's like a very quiet, restful day.
But you can sit and read a book.
Okay. I mean, I do, but I just never.
Yeah. You can sit and read a book. You
Correlated
can
all of this
study if
together.
you want, right? You can study Torah if you want. Read a book, right? So again, it's about using again, think of a world in which don't have lights on in the house, or you're not in an Orthodox context leaving the light on so that you can use it, right? Right. The utility of Shabbat candles is greatly diminished, if not obsolete, in a world with electricity and Shabbat timers and leave the lights on in the living room tonight so they're on, and all of this. Absolutely. Claudia.
I just wanted to go back to how we came to celebrate this, because you said at the beginning rabbis most likely wrote it out of, any meaningful document. And then it reappears 700 years later in Tractate Shabbat. But what happened in between? Did they celebrate it quietly? How did it just resurface?
Yeah, what happened in Babylon, for example?
Sorry?
What happened in Babylon, for example?
Well, great question. So the simple answer is that I don't really know. One, because I wasn't there. And there is a great book called From the Maccabees to the Mishnah, which talks about it a little bit. But my sense is that what we're going to look at in just a second here, and what we've already looked at in terms of this text, which is the rabbis writing in Babylonia, is they're not inventing something here. They're articulating, they're about to invent the narrative of the oil in 8 days. But in terms of practice, they're not inventing practice here. They're articulating what was most likely happening, right? So this idea of it being commemorated by lighting of a candle, or a candle for each person, or maybe even a candle for each day, right, is most likely what was going on. And that was probably it, right? And the recitation of Hallel, which was the prayer that I said goes mostly with Sukkot, but this prayer of thanksgiving to God, right? That's it. There was definitely no presents, nor foods fried in oil. Certainly not something like the modern observance of Hanukkah, but it was. I'm sure it was happening, but again, as a very minor thing. But this articulation of where are we placing it, these questions were clearly a response to what was happening in the community, during that time period. So we're going to get here now to what Miriam alluded to in a minute. Yeah, Miriam, go ahead.
Just a very quick question. I always thought that one never touches the Hanukkah Shabbat candle, not the Hanukkah, sorry, the Shabbat candles after you light them. And you can use them for light around it and read and play games, whatever. But you cannot literally lift it and bring it anywhere else. Is that correct or not correct?
That's a good question. I mean, I have to look specifically about if there's a prohibition against that, or if it's just a custom that people don't generally do it. Merle will tell you at camp we certainly do it, because you clear the table and make sure they don't go out and move them all over to the kitchen so that we don't burn down the dining hall. Ooh, maybe too soon for that one. I'd have to see if that's just a custom that we don't traipse around with them because it's not necessarily safe, or whether it's a custom or a prohibition. Yeah, Jeff.
I'm wondering if this isn't somewhat of a misnomer, in the sense of we have enough oil for one day. That's not a miracle. The miracle is really representative of 7 days of persistent lit oil. Mm-hmm. And that goes along with your concept of this representing a form of Sukkot. Again, the number 7, the significance of 7. So it's really a misnomer to think that this is a miracle of 8 days. It's really just a miracle of 7 days.
Yeah. The other piece that I'll share, which I think is a lovely, has nothing based on the text here and no historical significance, but a lovely sort of drash or rabbinic riff on this. I don't remember who I learned this from, but that the miracle is maybe one of hope, which is that they had enough oil for one day and they lit it anyway. Right? They knew going in that it wasn't going to, theoretically, it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to be enough, but they did it anyway. Mm-hmm. That is, shows something about Jewish character and about the miracle. But let's get into the text here. So this is the famous My Hanukkah that Miriam alluded to. So the Gemara asks, what is this Hanukkah business and why are the lights kindled on Hanukkah? And the answer that the sages teach is that on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. You can't eulogize on them. You can't fast on them. What's the reason? So here's a given. When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame, when the Maccabees overcame them and emerged victorious, they searched high and low and they only found one cruse of oil with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on it, undisturbed by the Greeks. And in it, there was just enough oil to light the menorah, right? Not the Hanukkah menorah, the regular 6-branched menorah for one day. But a miracle occurred. They lit it anyway, and for 8 days it burned. The next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays with the recitation of this special prayer of Hallel and special Thanksgiving prayers and blessings. Okay, that is where the rabbis deliberately create this myth of the oil lasting for 8 days. Right, that's where that comes from. Merle.
So, okay, this part about one may not eulogize them.
Yeah.
What is that in reference to? Like, you can't do a eulogy of someone during Hanukkah or when the Hanukkah candles are lit? I have a reason for asking this. It's the second, what is today? The first day of Hanukkah. And we buried my cousin this morning in a Zoom funeral, but the whole family was together. And the rabbi did a eulogy.
Yeah.
So is that not?
So I will confess, I've read this text, I don't know how many times. I studied it in rabbinical school many times. Until I was looking at this morning, I forgot that was part of it. And I got asked a half hour ago to do a funeral on Monday, this coming Monday. We'll absolutely give a eulogy. I don't know if in more traditional communities that, funerals or at least eulogies are prohibited during Hanukkah. The funeral would not be prohibited. The burial would not be prohibited. Maybe a eulogy would be. I've actually never seen that in practice, but no, it means theoretically during the days of Hanukkah, not while the candles are lit.
Okay.
Because it's meant to be a celebration.
Right. Thank you.
But in practice, we absolutely, do funerals and eulogies during Hanukkah. I'm not sure about in the Orthodox world.
A conservative rabbi and a conservative cemetery.
Again, to my knowledge, none of the observances surrounding Hanukkah are actually, binding Jewish law in the way they are for many other holidays, right? Because of the sort of minor status of the holiday.
Okay.
But you sparked my curiosity, to say the very least.
Well, let me know when you figure it out.
I will. I absolutely will. Right. So that's where this myth comes from, right? The rabbis layer on this entirely new narrative to the story. Again, as we talked about earlier, I think understandably living under Roman rule, not wanting to publicize this idea of, overthrowing occupying powers and forces. But here they create this whole new layer to the story. Artemi, nice to see you.
Hi, Rabbi. I just wanted to sort of add or ask that, you taught us before that the Torah should be regarded as a book of truths, not a book of facts. And this myth also is more like a truth, not a fact.
Absolutely.
Can it be regarded as such?
Absolutely, which I think actually goes to the point, so what, if you ask me, there's a million different things we could tease out, but what's the truth of this story? To me, it's that they lit it anyway, right? It's that they only had this little bit of oil, but they thought, okay, it's the best we can do. We'll do it anyway, right? Even though it's not perfect, we'll do our best. We won't be dissuaded from this, right?
Oh,
yeah.
I looked up eulogize. It can mean to deliver praise about somebody at a funeral, but it doesn't have to be at a funeral. eulogy
Hmm.
means to praise highly in speech or writing.
Yes.
Period.
Yes. I didn't
That's how
include
eulogy is
the Aramaic here, so I don't know, what the Hebrew is and what it's, this may not be a great translation. But yeah, this is interesting. I'm gonna do a little bit of homework on this one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Not because I want to get out of writing eulogy for Monday. Jeff.
One of the things that at least I was told is that when our Torah, was codified in Yavni around 200 AD, the reason for inclusion and exclusion was the degree to which God is mentioned inherent in the stories or books that they kept.
Yeah.
In the Apocrypha, pseudo-Apocrypha, those that were excluded had little mention of God's influence, so to speak. And that certainly is the essence of Hanukkah. God is totally excluded from this story and doesn't represent any teaching that would gain merit, so to speak, for anyone.
It's all human. It's human beings with their own agency and advocacy bringing about change.
Esther.
The one exception,
Esther
notably,
is
is obviously the story of Esther. Susan was just referencing.
Esther's in the Torah, and it has no God in it.
Right. So the only book in the Bible where God is not mentioned. Yes.
Right.
Yes. It's a good point, though, Jeff.
And a number of works in the Apocrypha do have God mentioned in them.
Yes.
So
I'm going to push us a little further just to get through this. This is sort of a bizarre text, but is one of my favorites, maybe because I just remember when I first learned it. But it sort of underscores, I think, with a bizarre. I think I like it because the image that gets painted is so bizarre, but really underscores how special and important Hanukkah lights are, different from normal lights, and how important it is, if possible, to put it outside. And the idea actually is that it's supposed to be, and again, thinking in slightly different real estate terms than the way our current homes and dwellings are constructed, but you're actually meant to place it on the threshold between what's called the public domain and the private domain. In essence, right on your property line, but just on your side of the property line. Now, here's the story, which is, again, a little bit of a tangent, where it says that they learned in a Mishnah that when it comes to legal cases of damages, and the example they use is if there's a spark from a blacksmith's hammer, right? The blacksmith hits a whatever, and the spark goes out and, causes a fire, the blacksmith is liable for starting the fire. Okay, the spark flies out into the street and burns down, I don't know, something. The blacksmith is liable. And similarly, and here's where it gets a little like a fun little imagery. Similarly, they say, okay, so in the case of a camel, because that's just normal, a camel that is walking down the street and the owner has flax, highly flammable, right? Flax, load it all up over the camel. And the camel is walking in the street, down the sidewalk, public domain, but the flax is branching off of the camel so much that as he's walking down the sidewalk, some of the flax, sticks out into, imagine like the Venice Boardwalk or whatever, into an open store. And the storekeeper has a lamp burning and the flax catches fire and then the building burns down. God forbid, who knows what happens to the camel, right? The owner of the camel is liable because the lamp is inside the storekeeper's store. That's totally fine. He's within his right to do that. It's the camel owner's problem because his flax on the camel was extending out into the private domain, right? Into the shop. Seems to make sense. Now, they qualify that by saying, however, if the shopkeeper's lamp was not actually in the store, but was just outside the store in the public domain, and the flax catches fire, then the storekeeper is liable, right? Because the camel was doing its job out in the public, and if he puts his fire out in the public, then suddenly he becomes liable for it. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. However, they qualify it that if it's Hanukkah lights, it's a little bit different, right? So here, Rabbi Yehuda says that, but if the flax is set on fire, not by a storekeeper's lamp, but by a Hanukkah lamp that is outside the entrance to the store, that the storekeeper is not liable. right? Because it's permitted for the storekeeper to put his Hanukkah just outside the door to the store, right? As long as it's within, and here it gets a little bit in the weeds, as long as it's within a certain distance, they say 10 handbreadths of the ground, right? Because theoretically they're saying it shouldn't, right? So if you put it way up too high and then it's asking to, it's asking to be caught on fire, right? So here's this idea, right? That it's so important to place your Hanukkah in a place where people can see it, that the normal rules, laws, what have you, surrounding damages and liability don't actually apply to a Hanukkah, because it matters so much to put it outside, right? Again, I would say because it really is about publicizing this miracle and putting light and warmth into a world at a dark time of year. And I think that it is an understatement to say that for so many of us, 2020 has been a little dark. And that, as I said at the beginning, that I was talking to someone on Tuesday who said to me that they're really leaning into Hanukkah this year, despite the fact that ordinarily they don't. And I think, I feel that way too, that there's a, maybe we need Hanukkah a little bit more this year than ordinarily, despite it being a minor holiday. And this is what our people have always done in the absolute darkest of times, is to light a Hanukkah and to bring a little bit of light into that. And I'm just leave you with a beautifully haunting image that I came across that really underscores this idea of, no matter what, Hanukkah is here to bring light into the darkness. So take a look at that.
Yeah, seen that before.
Yeah, it's a in some circles a well-known image, but
yeah,
a remarkable one when you really think about it. And so as we, hopefully all light our Hanukkot again tonight and for the remainder of Hanukkah, let's hope that, in so doing, we bring a little bit of light and a little bit of warmth into our lives, into our families, into the lives of those we love and care about, and into a world that I think, maybe at least in our lifetimes has never needed that light and needed that hope as much as it does right now. So Shabbat Shalom, Hanukkah Sameach to everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks for being here.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
And have an extra latke for me.
Chag Urim Sameach.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Happy Hanukkah to all who are in this group.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom all.
Have a nice Shabbat and lovely Hanukkah.
Thank you, Miriam. You too.
You.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye, Jan.
I'm very contemplative right now, Jeff, and I'm thinking that I will do what the rabbi says. I will look intensely at the lights that we light tonight. And instead of getting up, I will just sit at the table and look at the lights. Not until they burn down completely. That takes about 40 minutes. But I surely will sit and look intensely at the light.
You know what we
very
miss?
Very quietly.
You know what we miss, Miriam? We miss the ability to communicate the values of that light to our children, to our grandchildren in this time, unfortunately.
Well, it's not too late.
No, it's never too late as long as you at least make the effort on Zoom or whatever.
Well,
but it is a loss in a sense that it should have engendered in that situation. And there's a reference that I have that suggests that each of these 8 candles and the light represents a midot. That's the basis of a discussion that can be held to explain the light and the meaning of the midot in the actual living circumstances. And, that's unfortunately the failure of 2020 in being, allowing us to share the best of our thoughts. So anyway, Be
Okay,
well.
my
Have a
dear, you
great
too.
Hanukkah.
Stay
Enjoy
well.
yourself.
Stay safe.
Eat a lot of donuts, Miriam. I don't want you to miss out on the jelly fill.
I don't think I've bought any yet.
What?
Jeff, take
Yeah.
a minute.
Yeah.
I'm not giving you advice. I'm only giving you take a minute to share with your grandchildren. I guess they're different ages. Am I right? What are their
Oh, yeah.
ages?
15 down to 10.
Lovely. Well, I have 2, and I feel grateful for just 2. And I'm able to devote a lot of time to the 2 of them because, they're my grandchildren my old age. People are 60 and they already have grandchildren. And
Yeah.
mine are just 17 and 21, but very perfect ages for absorbing so much. Very political kids and all that. And I had the privilege of lighting candles with both my grandchildren yesterday night.
Wonderful.
Did it outside on our front stoop, or porch, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I live in the Fairfax neighborhood, in one of those, very middle class neighborhoods.
You live in the shtetl.
Not quite, because I have Catholics on one side of me and non-Jews on the other, and practically the rest of the block are Jewish. It's very mixed. My particular neighborhood is mixed. It's not Fairfax, it's west near La Cienega. A lot of middle streets. I don't know, a lot of people heard of them, called Blackburn and Colgate in Maryland. And
I've ridden in those streets before.
Exactly.
I
live in one of them. The houses are always sold very quickly. It's a neighborhood that people enjoy. At any rate, we took advantage of the privilege of being together with masks, socially distancing, just the 5 of us, my daughter, the 2 children, and my husband and myself. And we felt the Hanukkah lights so intensely. What we did, I have 9 menorahs, and we lit the shamash and the first candle of each. We won't do it every night, but we did it last night. So they all burned.
They all have a chance to share in that
and that is what we did. And I did what the rabbi said. After the brachot, we're not Orthodox, but we're very traditional. We were quiet, and I said, you know what? Let's stare at the candles, how beautiful they are, for just a minute or so. Let's all be very quiet, and let's think of ourselves as the light for this coming year.
Well, Miriam, let me make one comment.
Wait, I'm going to end with this sentence that was true. And I said to them, who and we bring light to? How can we be the burning light this year? I said it to my young children.
Well, Miriam, you know what you have created? You have created your own immortality. These acts that you share with your family and your children are what's going to be carried long after each of us is gone. And the values that you instilled are never forgotten. And, the fact that they may not be as knowledgeable as you in Judaism or Hebrew or any other element of your history, but the touching, the feeling, the emotions, the shared elements are what are the greatest value. And you've ensured your immortality and your memories for these